Now, for more on this, I spoke with Mark Watts, Executive Director for the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group. Now, C40 is a network of 86 megacities representing 600 million people, accounting for a quarter of global GDP. Now, it's focused on driving urban action to reduce climate risks while increasing urban health and economic opportunities. I began by asking how the cities were chosen and how they're taking leading roles in the fight against climate change.
We're an organisation of mostly the biggest cities in the world, so to be part of the club you have to have a population of over 3 million people. But there are a few other additional cities that were invited to join, which are smaller, but they're seen as the real leaders on shifting to a green economy, so Stockholm, Copenhagen, San Francisco. And the things that they tend to focus on is where mayors have got real big powers. So over the transportation system, shifting away from using private motor vehicles to mass transit, to more cycling, more walking. How we design buildings in the future, so mayors have lots of powers over building codes. And how we use land use planning, how the cities are designed, so moving away from that 20th century model of sprawling cities getting ever bigger to more compact and dense cities that are much more efficient and easier to manage.
Now, as we look at these C40 cities, as you mentioned, 25% of them make up a quarter of the world's GDP. Yet it's also some of the most vulnerable areas that really feel the effects of climate change. So what's being done to really make some of these urban areas do more?
Well, actually, the spur of collaboration and competition between the cities is the thing that's really driving action. So we measure the actions that are taken by our cities every year, and we've seen an exponential rise, sort of doubling each year over the last 4 or 5 years. And that's mostly from cities copying each other. So you find one city, let's say Bogota, started bus rapid transit. Bus services that span the length of the city and go at express speed so you can really use them to commute. They started doing that 10, 15 years ago. Hardly anyone else in the world was doing it. Now 45 of our cities have copied that idea and have got bus rapid transit in their own city.
And are you finding that by targeting this at the city level, using mayors and local leaders, is that a more effective way you're finding when it comes to really making those changes?
Yes. I mean, not to disparage the national governments, and it was an incredible thing that happened in Paris last year, that 190 heads of state came together and managed to make an agreement on climate change. But it had taken 20 years to get there. And in the meanwhile, mayors have just been getting on with it because they've already worked out that from pure self-interest, the best thing for cities, the best thing for urban citizens is to move away from dirty, polluting, high carbon model to a low carbon one. And that collaboration that really works across geographic boundaries, across economic differences, across language differences. Mayors have found a way of communicating with each other that allows them to work together in a way that had eluded national leaders for some time.
Now, let's look at some of the actionable steps that people can take. We see that urban areas account for 75% of the world's population and 70% of carbon emissions. So in terms of steps that people can take to really make sure that emissions don't rise as quickly in the future, what advice would you give?
Well, the first and most important thing is how the land use is used in the city. Really, you can't see a future for that old model of the big sprawling suburbs that you need a car to get to work each day and everybody lives in a detached house. It just doesn't work on a resource level, it doesn't work on a transport level, and from a carbon point of view, it's a disaster. So more compact, denser cities, but with lots of green space, pleasant places to live, but where public transport really works. Secondly, at that transport, which is absolutely critical, I just came back from Paris yesterday. Amazing things the mayor is doing there. Closing the north bank of the Seine to traffic altogether, trying to eradicate diesel vehicles completely from the centre of the city in the next 3 or 4 years, which I think will affect car markets across the world. And we're seeing that being copied all around the world. And then the final thing is what's done with buildings, because that's where most of energy is consumed within cities. In the C40, 60% of carbon emissions come from energy consumed in buildings. And there, it's about mayors setting really strong codes so that when new buildings are designed, they're made so that they don't need to use much energy to make them comfortable to live in, either for heat or for cooling. And then for in the Western cities, it's all about retrofitting the buildings so that we improve them, improve their quality, and reduce people's energy bills along the way. And cities like Melbourne, New York have done fantastic things around this, often working with the private sector.
Let's also look ahead. We have the upcoming meeting in Mexico City. Why is that so important?
Well, I think it's coming at a critical moment now. A year on from the Paris Agreement, great aspirations by the nation states, but that really needs to be turned into action now so that we can get on that pathway to minimizing temperature rises to 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial average. It's possible, but it's incredibly difficult. And for anyone who cares about climate change, it was a setback to see in the United States of America a president elected who, at least previously, has been in denial about climate change. We hope he'll change his mind. But in the meantime, this summit in Mexico is now absolutely incredibly important because we need to see the real leadership from the mayors of the big cities of the world saying, whatever happens at the nation state level, cities are getting on with it, the Paris Agreement is going to be delivered, and we are going to get on track to a low carbon, clean and safe world.